Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, where we dive into the world of helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. In each episode, we talk with the technicians, engineers, and experts who keep helicopters flying. Because at the end of the day, no maintenance, no mission.
Just a few years later in 2016, at least one of the two most visible and impactful accidents in the industry, especially during my career, happened. And that's when the EC225 suffered a catastrophic gearbox failure in Norway with no warning. The rotor separated and all on board were lost. The accident resulted in significant changes throughout the industry, from the engineering, manufacturing, logistics, and maintenance practices of the 225 fleet. It more or less killed the Super Puma fleet for a while, especially in the commercial industry.
Certainly did.
But from a fleet grounding just 4 years before to, again, a very, very visible accident with the rotor head, the entire everything just completely separated. What was that first 24 hours like for you, Ray?
I guess in a word, it was shocking. You know the phrase, my phone was blowing up. There were so many messages. It was all about, call me. That first 24 hours was really, really challenging because we just simply had no idea what had happened.
Thank you to this episode's sponsors, Precision Aviation Group and Alpine Aerotech.
Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie, Ries, joined to me by Faith Ortega. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit different. If you've been following this industry for any amount of time, you already know the accidents we're going to reference and the impacts that they've had on the helicopter industry. But what we're not going to do today is walk through exactly what happened. Instead, we're going to step back and look at something bigger. Because when an accident happens in aviation, it's not just a moment in time. It's the result of everything that came before it. Maintenance practices, inspection assumptions, design decisions, operational pressures, leadership priorities, and more. And just as important, it's what happened before the event and after the event that determines whether the system actually gets safer. Our guest today is Ray Bennett, currently a consultant at Proteus Advisors, but was the VP of Maintenance at CHC during much of the discussion today. He also has a background in the airlines, at a helicopter OEM, from a major supplier, and of course his start as an A&P. Ray, when you think about safety today, what actually creates it?
I think, a little bit of age and wisdom put together, hopefully some wisdom and learnings. It kind of comes down to about three things, right? One is integrity. And I think that's both personal integrity and the integrity of the corporations behind it, right? So it's everything from the design, the engineering, the OEMs, the production facilities, all the overhaul and repair facilities. So I think that's a big part of it. The other one I'd talk about is culture, right? And there's a lot of people that talk about having a safety culture, but I've seen some good practices and I've seen some less than good practices around culture. And then I think it's rigor. And engineering rigor would be the one that I'd spell out here, because if you go back to a lot of issues, you can see where maybe there was a gap in the rigor or the testing or the analysis, and that has continued to mature over time. So I think those three things, although broad, are really what puts together a safety system.
Faith, you've been around a couple organizations. What about you?
Yeah, I think you pretty well hit the nail on the head there. That's something that, when I was in A&P school, that was definitely implored to us was, hey, these people aren't just taking a chance on you, you're taking a chance on them. So, when you're asking questions at your interview and you're looking at a company, I always ask, hey, what happens to the mechanics that mess up? Right? Because you're human, you're going to mess up at some point. So do you work with them? Are they immediately packing up their toolbox? How does that look for you guys? Yeah. And then same thing, also integrity. So when you come to your employer and say, hey, technically this is worn and it's still within limits, but we only check this every 3 years because it's a 1,200 hour item or whatever the case may be. Can I go ahead and change that? I just would feel a lot better putting my name to this if I could just do that now. And if they say yes, or if they say no, if they're pinching pennies, what type of operation is it that's running? So I always ask those types of questions. And I work a lot with younger students that are in A&P school as well. And that's something I always kind of try to pass along to them is that, they're not just taking a chance on you, you're taking a chance on them.
So you speak about culture there, Ray. You started as an A&P and worked across airlines, helicopters, MROs, OEMs. I don't know how many more acronym companies I can throw at you, but can you give us a quick walkthrough of your career, where you started from and kind of where you are today?
Well, I'm currently talking to you from Miami, Florida, and that's where I started my career. So as I was in high school, I was going to A&P school at George T. Baker, which sits over here by the Miami International Airport. And so I'm a teenager at that point, and I'm going through all the relatively boring classes and trying not to go to the beach instead of the school and all those things, And did I ever think I'd still be doing it decades later? No, I didn't. But, just kind of come full circle, I sort of took my last role less than a mile from that building as a senior vice president of maintenance and technical operations. So I kind of thought, you never know. You never know where you're going in your career, that I'd end up right back home, so to speak. But in between those times, I was in the United States Marine Corps. I was a helicopter mechanic there. I spent time at FBOs. I worked for Delta Airlines for almost 18 years. A fantastic organization because it's so big. You could do multiple roles and still be all part of Delta Tech Ops, right? And I did everything from ground training instructors to lead mechanic and all the shifts and all that stuff. So that was a lot of fun. As you mentioned, I spent time at airframe MROs, worked with regional jets. I worked with another OEM in the helicopter business. I ran maintenance for CHC Helicopter for 5 years during some really interesting times. And then I worked at a component and repair facility, right? So we were an OEM and we also did the repairs. And I took a lot of my learnings from, we'll say, the line into the back shops where those technicians may not have ever touched a live aircraft, right? And how did I bring that relevance to the guy overhauling a starter? And why was that important? And then the past 4 years, I was VP of maintenance at an all-cargo airline here in Miami. And cargo is a whole different world again. So, yeah, I think I've seen this industry from a number of different views.
What drove you to going to be an A&P in the first place?
Well, I thought I wanted to be a pilot. And then a friend of mine took me up in his airplane, and I was like, I'm not really comfortable up here. So I think I'll just stick to fixing them. And and it never left me. I still look up when I hear them.
So beginning of the early part of the alphabet of the A&P towards the later part of your career being the VP, what did you ever see yourself making that transition when you first got your first toolbox?
Yeah, I think I did because I was always one for wanting to get better or more efficient or something like that, right? So I ended up going to school to have avionics as a background so I could work the line. And I realized I really didn't like avionics at all. So, to all of my avionics brothers out there and sisters, no offense, but it wasn't me. So I ended up taking other classes, which ended up leading to a bachelor's degree in finance. You can't really connect the dots there. But what I found fascinating was what I'll call the business behind the maintenance, right? And it's a business. It's how do you allocate capital? How do you build operating plans? What's the right amount of overtime to use from a dollar perspective, and all those other questions. And so I found that fascinating. And it was not rare, but certainly not a common attribute to have a business and finance background and hands-on experience on the aircraft. And I was able to marry those two things up and had a lot of fun, and I think helped a few organizations along the way.
And that change from commercial aviation, business aviation to helicopters, a little bit of a change in the industry there.
Yeah. Like I said, I was in the Marine Corps and I worked helicopters there, and I didn't know it at the time, right? Because I was still a teenager or in 20, 21 years old. And it's amazing, what the military can do, right? They take these very young people, and they're the pilots and they're the maintainers, and there are all those other things, and they have a fairly good safety record. And it's not until I kind of got past all that and looked backwards to say, well, what did they do? And they instill a certain culture, right? They're rigorous around process, set expectations, tool control was, I didn't know, like, why is somebody counting all my tools every time I come back from the flight deck? Didn't realize it at the time, but you know what I mean? Later, as you go through it, you go, wow, that's a pretty good system, that they've developed. So, yeah, so starting there in the Marine Corps and working on helicopters in a combat situation, right? I understood time pressures, and working at night and all the other things that influence the maintainers and the industry today. And then you're right. It was interesting because I was recruited to go work for a U.S. manufacturer, and I was over there, and then somebody else kind of came along and said, "Hey, why don't you come over here?" And I thought, what am I doing back in the helicopter world? I thought I got past that, but I didn't. And there's not a lot of other places they winch you out the door of an S-92 and drop you on an island in Ireland, for fun. So, I got to do so many fun things in the helicopter world.
So speaking so much around what maintainers were doing and what you got to experience and what you got to see, where were some of the places that you saw maintainers kind of get stuck in their career, I guess?
What I didn't think, I don't know if it's a career-wise, but I think that's a little bit different. I was going to say, I think maintainers get stuck a little bit into maybe making poor decisions because of time pressure. And that's one of the conversations I have, everywhere I've ever been, is there will always be time pressure. Okay. And you absolutely have the right to say stop. And it's not only a right, it's an obligation. A lot of people, you have to tell people that that's okay. You're not going to get in trouble for pushing pause and escalating the issue to a lead, a manager, or inspector, whoever you need to. So I would talk about that. The other one, thinking about that question, was taking shortcuts. I think that, and I there's a particular incident in mind that I think about, but when somebody takes a small shortcut and nothing happens, and then you do it again, and then they teach the other guy, hey, I know a better way to do this. We can save 20 minutes. And that's such a slippery slope, and you don't know it, right? You don't know what you're doing and the potential of it until something goes wrong. And just as a quick aside, the one that I'm thinking about was, we had a helicopter in the hangar, and there were people underneath the helicopter. It was on its main gear, and they were changing an antenna, I think. And the other guys decided they were going to remove part of the nose landing gear assembly. And instead of following the procedure, the guy literally told the new guy, watch this. I got a way to save some time. And the helicopter collapses on the poor guy under the helicopter. And because it's a helicopter, it's not, the team lifts it up, and he was on a mechanic's creeper, and they pull him out, and he was okay. But when you interview him and you say, well, what happened? Oh, I've been doing it this way. And you just think, okay, that's one of those lessons. You have to pass that on. Anyway, so those are some of the things as I think about when you get stuck, there's that. From a career progression, I don't know. There's a lot of people I know that love just continuing to be a mechanic or a lead mechanic, and that's their passion, and they'll retire doing that. I think that's terrific. So, following a career path is a little bit different for everybody.
Faith, I know you've talked extensively about the mentors that you've had throughout your career and doing things the right way. And, you're experiencing your career path of IA and pilot and various other things. How is the mentorship that you received kind of influenced where you want to go?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Big time. If it wasn't for all of the people at different points in my career saying, hey, you should try this, or have you ever thought about doing XYZ, I don't think I'd be where I am right now. And I still call those people all the time. Pinpointing the topic of safety, there are times where I call them and I'm like, am I crazy? Like for thinking that it's crazy that a company does something this way? I've called, so there was a gal that was really influential in my career. I won't go down this entire spiel, but she was the only professor at my college that was a female, and she just happened to be the helicopter maintenance professor. And I call her on a random Tuesday all the time. And I'm like, hey, how are you going? Like, how's this? How's that? And sometimes she'll ask me what's new in the industry or in my career. And yeah, every once in a while, though, when I'm really having one of those head scratcher days, I give her a call. But I'm at that point in my career now where it's crazy to me that I've met some younger people that consider me a mentor. So I'm that mentor-mentee. I don't think I'll ever not have a mentor. So they just come in all different walks. The gentleman I was working for when I was an apprentice, when I was in A&P school, I owe that gentleman a lot. His name's Bill Hopper, shameless plug. You may have heard some of his safety talks. That guy has been around the block. He's owned a flight school. He's been a CFII. He instructs. He does just about anything you can hope to do. He's helped the NTSB with accident investigation as a subject matter expert. Like, that man's done it all. So anytime I have questions about FARs, I call him. Anytime I have questions about safety, I call my friend Karen. She has a master's in safety. Like, I call all kinds of different people. So, but that's one thing that's great about this industry is you can pick up the phone and, 4 jobs ago, that person is still going to answer and be like, hey, how you been? And you can kind of, shoot the shit and ask them the questions that, you need answers to right then and there. So, but that's another thing I love about this industry is it's very small community, like big time. Like even some of the names we were talking about before we got rolling, I'm like, oh, I know who that is. You're like, oh, I know who that is. And so you definitely, it's going to come full circle at some point. But that's one thing I really do love about this career path.
Do you figure out what you want to be when you grow up yet, Faith?
Right. No, because it changes. I tell people that all the time. I actually had a group of A&Ps come through. They're in school still. And they're like, I'm like, hey, any of you guys considering helicopters? And you get the 1 or 2 hands in the back. And I'm like, well, if I can persuade you, there's some really cool stuff. Like, do you guys like adventure? Do you like traveling? Like, do you want to chase helicopters and fuel trucks on the West Coast for fire season? Like, do you want to live in the Gulf? Like, do you want to live abroad? So I always try to give them as much of the wow factor as I can. And I'm like, go do the cool move. Go move to Alaska or Hawaii or somewhere you wouldn't while you still can. So I always try to just explain to them how exciting this can be. Or if you want it to be a little bit more slow pace and you want to have a base job and it's a little bit more lax, you can have that too. So there's quite the broad spectrum when it comes to helicopter aviation.
Ray, out of all the jobs that you had, what was your one that you found the most rewarding?
Well, that's a little interesting because they're all, rewarding in different ways. But I will admit that the time that I spent with CHC Helicopter was a tremendous learning for me, right? I went from managing, say, a single site in the United States to 16 AOCs across the world, and we didn't operate in the U.S., so, we had maintenance everywhere from Tanzania to Australia to Norway to Scotland to Azerbaijan, right? That kind of thing. And all those different cultures. And how do you operate the same aircraft type, in 7 different countries and try to have near identical maintenance programs? How do you convince people of certain things, right? And so that was it was very challenging. It was challenging from a corporate perspective because we were owned by private equity, and then we were publicly traded, and then we were delisted, and eventually went through Chapter 11. So that was a roller coaster. We had the fatal accidents, but then it was also how to bring together multiple cultures and different, EASA operates a lot different than FAA than you would in some of the other countries. And all the regulatory environments were different. So yeah, I think it was very rewarding in that sense. And I know that I grew personally, and you don't grow through the easy stuff. You grow through the hard stuff, right? And there was just a lot of hard moments, but you come out the other side and you go, all right, I'm a much different leader. I think I'm a little bit wiser, and I've learned to respect the differences, on how and where people do what they do.
I got a question for you, Ray, while you're on that topic.
Yes.
So from someone like me that's still working on the shop floor, what is it like when you go from that transition from wrenching with the guys to now I am their superior, I am their boss, I am the director of maintenance,
Yeah.
I have to schedule these aircraft, I have to talk with the FAA on a regular basis, womp womp. I have to do all of that stuff that nobody on the shop floor wants to do. So what does that look like, your relationship with those guys when you become their supervisor or leader?
Yeah, so I was at Delta Airlines when I made the first move from, mechanic to lead mechanic. And I would say that the transition wasn't that hard, because what you have to realize, Faith, and all the new people that are coming into the industry, is that you develop your reputation from the minute you start. And so if you operate with professionalism and courtesy, and you treat others with respect, they don't mind if you suddenly become their leader, right? As long as you don't change. And so I think that part is okay. And you do develop a reputation over time and a method, of people respect you or they don't respect you. And I think that starts the day you sign on to any job. So I don't really think that part's terribly difficult. What I would say, though, is when you move into senior roles where maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 levels between you and the front line, my takeaway is never forget where you started. So one of the things I always continue to do is I spend a lot of time, weekends, nights, out on the flight line or the hangar floor or wherever I need to be, and just talking to the guys and saying, what are you doing? Let me see the paperwork behind that, because otherwise you don't maintain that fluency unless you get out there and really have those conversations. And that's what I would say is just, if you're going to be in charge, so to speak, then it's really servant leadership, right? How do I make it easier, better, safer for my technicians, my engineers, my mechanics, depending on which country you're in? And are they comfortable, raising their hand and asking questions about what they're doing? And I talked about culture was the first question we had. And that's how I tried to always set a culture, was that people had no qualms about saying, we haven't had a calibrated torque wrench in stock in this range in 2 weeks. Really? And then we go solve that problem. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's Faith. That's how I think about it is just be who you are and don't really forget where you came from.
I like it.
Ray, you'll be joining us at the Vertical MRO event in November, correct?
I will be, yes. Dallas, Texas, I believe.
Yeah, and you'll be presenting. What is the name of your presentation you'll be doing there?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think it's something like safety as a chain. Sounds familiar. I haven't worked on it in a while because I guess I procrastinate. But
it's in November. You got plenty of time.
That was my thought. So,
and we'll be discussing kind of safety as a chain related to various accidents throughout your career. Is that correct?
Well, one predominant accident that occurred in Norway, and it was April of 2016. So that one has always stuck with me. Thankfully, I have not been involved in many fatal accidents in my career. There was one at Delta where I learned a lot. There was another one where I kind of watched how politics isn't the right word, but how people managed crises, right? And there was an incident involving an Alaska Airlines MD-80 series that went into the Pacific, and there was one point where in the U.S. the NTSB wanted to ground all derivatives, the DC-9, the MD-80s, and between American Airlines and Alaska and the other operators in Delta, we all kind of got together and said, why would you ground the DC-9? You know what I mean? It's been 30 years. And so we were able to work with the U.S. government and the NTSB and the FAA and kind of convince them that we could point to a maintenance error as opposed to a systemic or manufacturing type issue. And so that was the first time I sort of saw crisis in action and how it was managed. And, as Faith mentioned, having good mentors. And I watched a particular individual lead that. I said, so that's how you do it, and it was one of those learning moments that I think prepared me for the other accidents that came when I was that person who had to sort of manage it. So, yeah, that's how I kind of ended up there. But in one particular accident, but what bothers me about that is when you look back, the whole Swiss cheese theory and safety and all that, right? There was already a similar defect, and then there was a ditching in the sea, and then there was and then this happened. And so I've always wondered, what could we have learned? What should we, as an industry, as an operator, what should I have done different? What could I have possibly seen or done or thought of that could have prevented that? So it's kind of haunted me for a while. To tell you the truth, I haven't really looked at any details around that accident and until I was asked about joining the MRO in Dallas.
And as we get into the tough conversations around accidents and think about the lives lost throughout the years, I mean, there's accidents happen in the industry, fixed wing helicopters, the DC accident, the LaGuardia accident, helicopters, unfortunately. I mean, it's a part of our industry, and there's always a rush to judgment, I think, from a lot of folks that Monday morning quarterback, I would have done this differently. I know that organization, or there's always around that. Do you think that there's some psychological need for us to kind of look at these traumatic events and come up with our own thoughts immediately around it? Or what do you think happens? Why is this so prevalent in our industry?
Thank you to our sponsor, Alpine Aerotech. Alpine Aerotech supports leading helicopter makes and models, including Bell, Airbus, and Leonardo. From comprehensive MRO services to innovative product development, we are your trusted partner, backed by decades of experience and industry-leading expertise. Visit us at alpineaerotech.com for more information.
Yeah, and what I'm going to say, Ronnie, is I think people have questions, but for all different reasons. And that's the other part that complicates things. So the maintainers and the flight crew, they want to know right away what happened, right? Because you know the people involved, the aircraft, this is right. This is your livelihood around that, and then you have all the other aspects and all the other entities that also want questions. So if I think about this accident, I had the board of directors of what at the time a publicly traded corporation. They wanted to know, are we liable? What's going on here? Are we, And then you had leadership that had just joined us. So they weren't very familiar with the helicopter business. They were familiar with oil and gas. And they had their own series of speculations that were not rational, right? And so you have to kind of fend off this little bit of crazy talk. Then you had the offshore oil workers union, I think they're called Unite. And they went out there and said, this happened, these guys did this, right? Then you have the OEM who has to protect its brand and its sales. And it couldn't be us. we've got 2 million flight hours in this thing. It had to be the maintainers. And so you have all these people all trying to come to a potential early conclusion on what happened, and for all different reasons. And by the time the story got done at the end of this, I don't think anybody would have guessed where it ended, right? So it proved almost everybody incorrect. But I think that's natural. I think it still happens. And I still do it myself. You know, when you hear about, for example, Washington, D.C., a helicopter and a regional jet collision, being an industry veteran, I kind of could go, I can see that happening. You know what I mean? Like, there's been enough signs in the past few years that I could see that likelihood. But I never came to any conclusion around who was to blame. I just thought that's a reasonable event given the criticality of the airspace, the proximity, the way the military flies, particularly when they're night vision and things like that. So, yeah, it wasn't a rush to judgment, but you do have certain conclusions, I guess, that you put forth until you know better.
Being in the industry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Go ahead. I'm just going to say that the need to wait for the regulators, the NTSB and so forth. I mean, it's hard waiting for even that preliminary report, right? But I'm not nearly as close to the actual aircraft and crew as you are, Faith. I mean, chime in here.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, it's always frustrating to see the way news articles are written, especially with us having an aviation background that's so heavy. Like you were just saying, you know, you understand that airspace, the way those aircraft fly, what that area looks like, all of the things. And especially being in the military yourself and having a helicopter background and airlines, you know, you can see both sides of the coin. So sometimes when I read headlines, though, I'm like, oh, man, to someone that doesn't know, that really seems biased one way or the other. And so sometimes I wish some of these, larger reporting entities would kind of chill out until some people with some facts stepped up, because sometimes my husband or some people will send me stuff and I'm like, oh, boy, that is not even close. Like, I'm going to wait till we actually read something with some facts to it. So.
Faith, does TikTok count as a news agency? I'm not sure if that's
the way millennials are getting theirs. Okay, I don't know. I'm a millennial, so
a news agency. It's a search engine. It's the friend update. It's the social. It's everything. There's
things I don't tell my friends sometimes, because they'll talk about something and I just So there was this incident where I can't remember the airline, but they were departing out of Brazil, and one of the engines, they had an engine fire and they had to turn back, and everybody was safe. But you see the photo in the engine and people are screaming and I thought, yeah, if you only knew how many engine fires actually happen out there. But there's also no way to explain the redundancy built into modern aircraft, and the fact that it can fly for a long time on one engine at max thrust, and all those other things. So I just go, and I kind of don't speculate about it. But it's there is a rush to judgment, certainly, and you're right. With today's social media, it gets a little bit out of control. One of the other things as you talk about, as we talked about culture a little bit, there's also the culture of the country by which that airline is or helicopter is registered, right, and how they operate. And one of the observations that I've had is the U.S. and the NTSB are very hesitant to release details. You don't see press conferences very often. When you do, they're a little quiet on details, although this one at DC was probably the most talked about investigation I've seen. But when we had the situation in Norway, there was a daily briefing, and one of our mechanics in Norway was on the investigation board. So he wasn't supposed to, but every day he'd say, hey, we found a piece of gear that looks like this, we're not sure what it means. And then in Ireland, it was a full public event when they had a fatal accident. And there were no details not shared. right? So it's interesting how each country and the media in those countries also has a whole different methodology around what they consider, proprietary versus public information.
I think it's also the prevalence of having more video available, right? The fact that almost all even the air tour in New York, right? When you see the aircraft go down, it becomes that more public. So, so let's start at the beginning of your CHC career in 2012. And talk about the incident leading up to the Norway one. 2 different EC-225s went down in 2012, ditched in the North Sea. They received some gearbox oil pressure warnings. The crews followed the procedures. Everyone survived, thankfully, but they both ditched in the water. The impact, obviously, was the aircraft, the fleet was grounded. And CHC and various other large operators had a lot of 225s. What did the initial grounding of the fleet look like at CHC for you guys?
I think I was on the job about 3 months when our helicopter ditched in the North Sea, and I was watching the videos, and I said, well, I've never really seen a helicopter get towed by a tugboat before. So what have I done? Like, what did I just sign up for again? Thankfully, no injuries, no fatalities. Everybody followed the process and the procedures, and everybody was safe. But what followed on was quite a learning experience. And so, immediately we, we're all on the airfield. This was out of Aberdeen, right? So you had Bonds, CHC, and a few others all right there on the same airfield. Everybody knows everybody. The phones are all ringing. There's a little bit of speculation, but the main thing is what really happened. Here's what we're hearing on the news. And I'm sure there was some unofficial chatter, around that. But basically, it was, we got to stop flying right now. And we did stop flying. But that took longer than expected. So, the initial part was a lot of questions to Airbus or Eurocopter. I think they were Airbus at the time. They were. Mm-hmm. And a lot of questions. And eventually, just to be honest, we weren't satisfied with the responses. And so what happened was interesting. It was kind of a new dynamic for me personally to see, is that all the operators joined together and continued to meet with the OEM and continued to put pressure, but also were part of the problem solving, right? There wasn't finger pointing. It was, look, we collectively have to feel good about putting these back in the air. And therefore, we need to really understand what happened and agree that that's really what happened and that the corrective measures are adequate. And there were a lot of very tense moments. The current CEO of Airbus was the CEO of Airbus Helicopters then, Mr. Faure. And I'm sure his handling of that event probably helped him, career-wise, because at 2018, he was named CEO of Airbus. And so I would say that, but what does it look like operationally? Well, you've just lost 25% of your fleet. For how long? Let's assume 2 weeks. That was our initial thing. Let's go 2 weeks to a month. What's our play? And so you had to rely on the other heavy lift helicopters like the S-92 that we were operating and the earlier generation Pumas as opposed to the Super Pumas. And so you start making those. But then that drives maintenance program changes because now you're flying more hours, more cycles, more landings than you were prior. So they accelerated activity, increased the tempo on the repair side. And it also said, do I have enough trained pilots for this increased operating tempo because we're flying these other helicopters more and more? So every operator had to kind of go through that internal dynamic and figure out what they were going to do, how fast could they retrain crews, et cetera. And it really drove a lot of changes to the maintenance as well. And we found ourselves going to 3 shifts, a little heavier than we were before, things of that nature.
What were some of the biggest lessons learned from that incident in particular?
If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel, @vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. From the latest podcast episodes to conference updates and even epic photography, Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry.
I think not to get too deep into it, but what I learned there, this is my personal, is that the first question we asked the collective we, the group of operators of this helicopter type asked was for the OEM to figure out what went wrong. And I'm just going to be candid here, is that the OEM went and asked the people that designed the gearbox to find the flaw in the gearbox. And they did not, and they could not. And I think we all grew. I think Airbus Helicopter grew as a matter. So my other company that I had worked for is Sikorsky, right? And at Sikorsky, as you introduced either reliability issues or you wanted to make major modifications, we ran it through what they called a graybeard review. That's the first time I'd heard the phrase graybeard, right? But it basically meant a bunch of retired engineers who had nothing left to lose, right, would sit on a board and throw darts at the theory and say, you haven't considered this, your stress analysis is wrong in this case, that, right? And when I brought that up, and I was the one that brought that up to Airbus, they didn't have that process. They didn't have that consortium of retired engineers or whatever. So it was after several meetings and heated debates and things like that, and we would meet in London. It's kind of like neutral territory. And after all that, we brought in eventually Georgia Institute of Technology, because of their engineering program. We brought in a company called Kinetic, but with Q's, out of the UK. And there's a Cranfield University was also a participant. And I feel like there's a fourth. And then they all got together and performed root cause analysis. And in doing so, discovered, I believe it was 2 separate and distinct root causes of that failure. Mm-hmm. But if we, as an industry, had sat back and said, okay, we believe you, it wouldn't have worked. So we had to challenge it. And we had to challenge it professionally and with logic. And we did that. The other thing that I always found interesting was I was still fairly new to CHC at the time. And I asked around and I said, do we have, by chance, any stress engineers or somebody that can look at these analysis? And they said, oh, we have this lady who works in Vancouver and she used to work for Rolls-Royce and she has a PhD in metallurgy and multiple patents on welding technology. And I went, and she does what? Oh, she works for us part-time as an analyst. Hello? Hey, can you fly to London? You will? Thank you. And I don't know what she said because she was speaking high-level engineering speak. But she eviscerated the first report, and said that no way is this analysis congruent with generally accepted failure mode analysis and all this other stuff. And anyway, but guess what? At the end of that, we came up with good root causes and solutions. So we thought, and we returned the fleet to the air.
And then just a few years later, in 2016. At least one of the 2 most visible and impactful accidents in the industry, especially during my career, happened. And that's when the EC225 suffered a catastrophic gearbox failure in Norway with no warning. The rotor separated and all on board were lost. The accident resulted in significant changes throughout the industry, from the engineering, manufacturing, logistics, and maintenance practices of the 225 fleet. For everybody who's listening, there is an outstanding video about the accident investigation on Airbus's YouTube channel. I recommend everyone watch. But some of the changes from that accident include recognizing the need for improving the legacy hum sensors that weren't able to detect certain failures. New sensors had to be done. New analysis needed to be developed. There was legacy chip detectors that weren't accurate enough, needed to be improved. That care and monitoring included the logistics chain, changing suppliers, and more. It is a almost 10-minute video. I highly, highly recommend everyone take a look at that. But that accident I'm just going to say it more or less killed the Super Puma fleet for a while, especially in the commercial industry.
Certainly did.
Military operators kept operating, but across it was basically grounded worldwide for I don't know, a year, 2 years almost.
Yeah.
And the confidence for many operators is just now coming back from some of the offshore operations from that perspective. But from a fleet grounding just 4 years before to, again, a very, very visible accident with the rotor head, the entire everything just completely separated as you can't see the aircraft. What was that first 24 hours like for you, Ray?
I guess in a word, it was shocking. You know the phrase, my phone was blowing up. So I was on an international flight from London back to Miami, returning from Scotland. And when I landed, I turned my phone on, and I don't know, right? There were so many messages. It was, I was trying. It was all about call me. So I'm standing in the aisle trying to get my bags from the overhead bin, and they tell me that there was this fatal accident. And I stepped off the plane, and I just started, I didn't even go through customs or anything else. My boss is like, get back on the plane. I go, Dave, I can't just get back on the plane. It's not going back to, so there was, right? You talk about this rush to judgment and a little bit of people freaking out, right? But that first 24 hours was really, really challenging because we just simply had no idea what had happened. There were no reported incidents. It was a clean maintenance history. And I will tell you, to this day, there was a video, right? And somebody, I don't know how, but somebody captured the rotor head just in the blades, flying by. And I've never seen it again. I refuse to watch it a second time. And anyway, so you finally get to the point where you go, here's what I know. The rotor head departed, the aircraft crashed, everybody died, no maintenance history. We had aircraft in air. We had aircraft we stopped them out on the rigs. So we had that whole situation. And basically, you just work for the next 3 days straight, right? Trying to figure out what to do. Is it safe? Do we transport that helicopter back from the rig? Can we get one more flight out of it? Is it right? And we would have these group conversations with chief pilots, and at that point, nobody wanted to fly again in those aircraft. They said, there's no statistical difference between the next flight and the next 100 flights, right? You just don't know. And so we agreed. We left them out on the rigs. We left them wherever they were. If they were in the air, make it back to base. And the Norwegians are a very no nonsense culture, I guess is one way to say that, right? And so I didn't have doubts or questions about maintenance practices, failure to follow procedures, pilot capabilities. The Norwegians are at the top of the game, right? And so you start wondering, well, if it's none of the first obvious kind of things, what in the world happened? So that was a tough situation for the first few days. Yeah, for sure.
Was it your military background experience or the different positions you've been at throughout your career? I mean, how do you lead without answers? Like what got you through that period?
Well, some people have called me Spock because I have no emotion, right? So I think part of it is just my nature, right? But it's a weird thing, I can get pretty worked up over somebody driving slow on the road, but I remain extremely calm in the middle of a crisis. And part of that is observation of mentors, right? And I watched what other people do, and that was the key. Was people are looking all the time, right? And they're observing, and they're going to take their cue from you. So if you are factual, if you are honest, if you are respectful, then it really calms things, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, you have all these different stakeholders, right? The board wants to know what's going on. The CEO wants to know what's going on. The regulator wants to know what's going on. The pilots want to know what's going on. The offshore oil workers want to know what's going on. Are they ever going to step foot again? And you're really playing in the middle of that. Now, the other thing I'd say is I think we had a great team, because it certainly wasn't just me. I might have had that side of it, but there's a gentleman, Duncan Trapp. I'm sure you guys know him or know of him. He was the VP of safety at the time, and he was just an outstanding figure in helping to solve this crisis and the one prior. So where I would be a bit of a blunt force, he was the more refined British, kept everything calm down, and
keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, he was that guy. He was also a former fighter pilot, right? So he'd been in it too, right? He'd been in the ship, and he gets it. And so he was really able to help bridge all these different parties and talk to his peers in the safety side while I talked to my peers on the maintenance side, and together, we formed it. One of the things that I think CHC did right was, every year they have this safety conference, right? And they came out with a motto that said, "We will never compete on safety." And what that meant was full transparency. So if Bond had an issue, Bristow had an issue, or one of the other helicopter companies had challenges, we didn't have any issue sharing that information and cooperating, because that's just really what you had to do, So yeah, it was challenging to manage the multiple stakeholders, and everybody thought that if I raise my voice a little bit more, I'm going to be more important, right? So you really had to combat all this, and for myself personally, I had to try hard not to be defensive. I had to try hard not to be defensive about the maintenance practices, or could a mechanic have made a mistake, or did we miss something in the shop? You don't know. So you have to be completely open-minded about that. And that's also a struggle.
Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of this conversation. Be sure to catch part 2. It's packed with more insights you won't want to miss.
Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Thank you to our sponsor, Alpine Aerotech. Alpine Aerotech supports leading helicopter makes and models, including Bell, Airbus, and Leonardo. From comprehensive MRO services to innovative product development, we are your trusted partner, backed by decades of experience and industry-leading expertise. Visit us at alpineaerotech.com for more information. If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel, @vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. From the latest podcast episodes to conference updates, and even epic photography, Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry.